Here's another question from the audience. They asked, after years of basing my life choices, my thought patterns, my beliefs on what the Big C church told me was the truth, and even teaching it myself for a while, I began to see that what they said didn't really match up with who I felt Jesus was supposed to be. And finally, after a lot of wrestling, I stepped back and I left the church. I left everything associated with it, even my Bible, because it feels confusing. So this person's question is, how do I not throw the whole thing out? How can I reconcile Big C church and Jesus? What an honest, heartbreaking, and also hope-filled question. Let's discuss it, shall we? So first off, let's just name how devastating that must have been, and probably still is, that you gave so much of your life energy towards something that turned out to not be ultimately what you wanted from life. For what it's worth, you've also just described a trajectory that like a lot of people experience, whether having to do with the church or not. I mean, this is kind of where we get the whole midlife crisis thing from, because of just how common it is for people to spend the first several decades of their life climbing to the top of some ladder, only to realize once they've got to the top that the ladder was leaning up against the wrong kind of wall. So I want to affirm your experience that is painful, sad, at times infuriating, I'm sure, as well as try to normalize it. In other words, this didn't happen to you because you did something wrong. This is just a thing that happens, especially for people who grow, for individuals that have open minds and open hearts, which sounds like you do, for people who see the value in transformation and maturation. For folks like that, for folks like you, there is no other path than the one that grows out of and beyond the things that it used to find security and comfort in. You know what I mean? And then I also want to point out just how incredible it is that you pursued honesty and integrity within yourself, as opposed to bifurcating your being and severing your internal convictions from your external realities. No, you opted for the way of integration. You noticed that deep inside you was a feeling of discontent, disconnect between the Jesus of your experience and the Jesus, as you put it, of the Big C church. So can I just say, well, freaking done. Good job. Because a lot of people have that same experience, that same disconnect. And a lot of people choose to repress it, or they fight it. They know that what they're participating in, whether it's religion, church, and so on, they know that it's not actually representative of their core beliefs, but they do it anyway. I mean, I've seen this kind of posture time and time again, and it just doesn't go well for people. But you, my friend, you chose the path of seeking alignment, of pursuing wholeness. Now, speaking of wholeness, did you know that the Greek word in the New Testament that is most often translated as salvation, or being saved, is the Greek word sozo? And did you know that sozo literally means to be made whole? So part of what salvation is, what it means to be saved, is to be made whole, to have your parts integrated. So I know this might sound odd at first, but what if you leaving the church and not cracking open your Bible is actually your salvation? Now, I get it. Your mind might immediately object because you, possibly like so many of us, have been conditioned to hear this term salvation and think, go to heaven when you die. But that's why I wanted to point you to the word, to this concept of sozo, and how it actually just means to be made whole, to have your parts put back together. So then, if it's true that your path to salvation involved, or maybe even required, that you made some difficult choices to allow the church and the Bible of your past to die, then how might that impact this question of yours, where you ask, how do I just not throw the whole thing out? How do I reconcile Big C church and Jesus? Because it sounds to me like there's a part of you, maybe like this latent part deep in your consciousness, that was conditioned to believe that throwing out the church or throwing out the Bible would be a bad thing. And since there's this part of you that maybe still believes this would be a bad thing to do, then it's driving you to this question of, how do I not do it? Because I've been so convinced that it's bad to do it. But I don't know. What if it's not like a bad thing? What if we could remove the sting, extract the shame from this? What if you gave yourself permission, for now at least, like you don't need to make any long-term commitments, just for now, what if you gave yourself permission to not do church, to not do the Bible, and just let that be okay? And if that feels like too much of a stretch, then just rewind, go back to where I said that salvation is about finding wholeness. And maybe your path to wholeness, your path of integration so far has looked like this invitation to align your internal convictions, aka when you were like, Jesus is not who I have always been told that he is, with your external actions, aka pulling back from the Big C church. And then the last thing I'll say is maybe reconciling Big C church with Jesus for you might end up looking like maybe just what you're doing now. Naming and accepting that there seems to be this kind of depressing disconnect between who Jesus was, what he was about, what he stood for, with so much of what Western modern American church is and is about and stands for. What if for now you simply let go of these self-imposed pressures that you seem to put on yourself to try to reconcile church with Jesus? Like maybe just let them be what they are. Two different things. Things that, sure, sometimes in some places, for some people, they do find connection. They do find overlap. But for you, for now, they don't. And while I totally get that that can be discomforting and sad and even worth grieving, maybe it can also be a signpost toward liberation. Because remember, there was no such thing as church, let alone Big C church, during Jesus' lifetime. And people seemed to still be able to follow Jesus, to learn from him, to experience healing and wholeness by him, to know love because of him, and to discover and experience God through him. And so may it be for you. Those are my thoughts anyway.